for the Grand Night, for the Deputy Grand Night. This evening, I'd like to speak about a subject that's very important to me, and I know to some of you as well, and that is Eucharistic Adoration. As Catholics, of course, we hold to a belief in the real presence. We believe that Jesus is present, body, blood, soul, and divinity in the consecrated host. A critically important teaching that if I can figure out how to explain it clearly in 10 minutes, I'll do a presentation on sometime. But for now, just want to remind everyone that the real presence is where the discussion of Eucharistic Adoration begins. So what is Eucharistic Adoration? Well, it's simply the practice of spending time before the Blessed Sacrament. There are formal prayers that can be used in Eucharistic Adoration. Often people will recite the Psalms or pray the Rosary, say personal prayers. But it's not really necessary in most cases to do anything. It's just time spent with Jesus. Types of prayer. You know, most of us think of types of prayer. We think there are 5 types of prayer: praise or praise and worship, petition and intercession, supplication, thanksgiving, and spiritual warfare. But there's another way to think about types of prayer, in which there are 2 types. The first is called Cataphatic Prayer. Cataphatic Prayer is made up of words, gestures, symbols. It has content. It's what most of us think of when we think of prayer. The other type of prayer is called apophatic prayer. Apophatic prayer is about silence. It's about clearing and calming the mind and allowing God to speak. Apophatic prayer is more common in Eastern Christianity, but one place where we do find it in the Western tradition is in Eucharistic Adoration. So the history of adoration, how did we come to have the Eucharistic Adoration as we practice it today? Well, there are a number of kind of elements that came together along the history of the Church to give us Eucharistic Adoration. The first is the practice of reserving some of the host. So when the host is consecrated in the Mass, there's a portion for distribution to the faithful, there's a portion to be eaten by the priest, and then there's a portion that's reserved. That's for viaticum, in the case that host is needed on an emergency basis, and you don't have time to say a Mass for somebody who's dying. And some of it is just to keep Jesus present, in the church itself. That practice goes right back to the beginning of the church. We actually have written documentation from Justin Martyr talking about reservation of the host that dates to about 150 AD. The practice of praying in the presence of the host, that's actually something that goes back to the early monastics. Also in the 2nd century, there was a movement to go out into the wild spaces, the deserts of Palestine and Egypt, for a lot of reasons. The Christians were being persecuted at the time. It was found it's possible to really live in the world and keep your hands completely clean. The world presents us with all sorts of temptation. So the monastics were interested in trying to address those problems by segregating themselves from the world around them. They took on lives of radical simplicity and intentional hardship, and made their lives a kind of ongoing act of penance, a kind of living devotion. I have a lot of interest in the Desert Fathers, but it seems that one of the things they did is they couldn't receive all the time, so they would keep a bit of the reserved host with them, and it became their practice to pray in the presence of it. Perpetual Prayer. In 412, an order of monks was established called the Acoamente. Apologies to anyone who actually speaks Greek. That means vigil keepers or sleepless ones. They established chapels where their members would, take shifts and they prayed 24 hours a day, 365. The practice of perpetual prayer may predate them, but we can document that it was a practice of theirs, at the beginning of 412. Exposition of the host. This is something I didn't know, but exposing the host, actually taking it out of the ciborium or the tabernacle where it was kept, and exposing it for adoration, was an innovation of Francis of Assisi, who brought Eucharistic adoration, the practice of Eucharistic adoration, to Italy. Clare of Assisi, you may know the story. In 1240, Emperor Frederick II and Pope were at odds with one another. The town of Assisi sided with the Pope, and the army of Frederick II attacked Assisi. And in serving in the army, there was a contingent of Saracen mercenaries, Turks and Moors, Muslims from North Africa and Turkey. And they attacked the convent in San Damiano, where St. Clare and her sisters lived. And St. Clare grabbed the monstrance with the host and led the sisters out to confront the Saracens. And we don't know what they saw, but we do know that they fled in terror when she approached them with the Blessed Sacrament. And the monastery, or the convent rather, was spared. The Battle of Lepanto, the Turks captured Constantinople in 451. By 1529, they were laying siege to Vienna. By 1571, it looked like all of Europe might fall. In that year, the Holy League, which was a kind of confederation of Catholic states, put together an armada that left from Sicily to confront the Turkish Navy. They met them in the Gulf of Patras, where the Christians won, frankly, an unexpected and decisive victory that didn't stop the Ottoman efforts to expand their empire into Europe, but it did really change the landscape and preserve Christian Europe. In the run-up to the naval battle, the Pope asked all the churches in Europe to expose the sacrament, and he asked everyone who could to engage in Eucharistic adoration and to pray the Rosary. And so this naval upset did a lot to promote Eucharistic adoration, devotion to the Eucharist. The Holy Hour. In 1673, St. Margaret Mary Alacoque, the French nun and mystic, experienced a vision in which Jesus asked her to spend 1 hour with him every Thursday night. Eucharistic Congresses. Since 1881, there have been several Eucharistic Congresses to promote devotion to the Eucharist, including Eucharistic adoration. Post-Vatican II. Vatican II actually encouraged and promoted Eucharistic adoration, as did Paul VI. But in the 60s and 70s, we kind of went through this period of time where ecumenicalism was the rage, and things that were traditional were kind of de-emphasized. I don't remember as a kid in the 70s ever encountering Eucharistic adoration. Fortunately, there's been a real renaissance in the practice in recent years. Forms of adoration. So today there are a lot of different circumstances when the host might be exposed to Corpus Christi procession, for example. But Eucharistic adoration falls into kind of two buckets. There's perpetual adoration, which is probably what most of you are most familiar with. You have the chapel over at St. Thomas More, where everybody takes an hour and you have to try to keep the chapel filled. But the other is Exposition of Benediction, which actually has its own liturgical requirements and has sort of subcategories to it. There's the Holy Hour. There's the periods of time that are longer than an hour, that are usually, individuals usually take hourly shifts. There's something called Exposition and Benediction with praise and worship. There's something called the Quaternore, or the 40 hours devotion, which actually begins with a massive exposition, and then the host is exposed for 40 hours. That's often done Good Friday to Easter morning. And then there's the one that I particularly want to talk about. There's something called Nocturnal Adoration. In 1809, Napoleon took Pope Pius VII prisoner. Actually, just a quick sidebar, because a quote I really like a lot comes from Pius VII. Napoleon confronted him, and he was wagging his finger at him and telling the Pope all about how he was going to destroy the Catholic Church. And the Pope laughed at him and said, "You think you're going to succeed where generations of bishops have failed?" So I kind of found that entertaining. So the Nocturnal Adoration Society was founded in Rome in 1810 as a response to the Pope being held, Pope Pius VII being held prisoner. Nocturnal Adoration takes place on the first Friday of every month. We actually have there's a formal Nocturnal Adoration Society. I'm a member. We have a chapter here that meets at St. Louis, in the Pittsburgh area that meets at St. Louis. The hours are rotating, so we would start at 10 o'clock at night. We're broken up into groups. I'm group 3. So we would start at 10 o'clock, and there would be a group that would meet at 11. And then, this coming Friday, I'm on midnight. My group is on midnight to 1. So next month we'll be on 1 to 2. And then the month after that we'll be on 2 to 3. And then we'll go back until we get back to 10 a.m. There's actually a book called The Office of the Blessed Sacrament, which goes with the practice of nocturnal adoration. So it's a little different than the perpetual adoration that I think most of you are familiar with. It's antiphonal. There's a right side, a left side, and a leader. So when when you do the Psalms, for example, the right side goes, then the left side goes, right side goes, left side goes. There are scripture readings. There are commentaries. There are 2 periods usually within the hour of silence, 5 to 7 minutes each, where you can just offer up whatever personal prayers you care to. It's a really good experience, and it's, I think, a great way to kind of introduce people to adoration, because it's 1 hour a month. On the first Friday, you can, it's not an enormous commitment, but it's a little bit different form of adoration than I think what most of you are used to or have experienced. So I do want to invite any of you who would like to come. If you want to come Friday, or you want to come any month when it's the first Friday, I'm happily sign you in, and you can try it out if it's something that might be of interest to you. And just about that, I've been trying to find some statistics on the number of people involved in Eucharistic adoration, and it's so broken. There are orders devoted to Christ in the Eucharist. There are apostolates designed to promoting Eucharistic devotions. They're all kind of, so all I could find was the Nocturnal Adoration Society itself, and we have more than 1 million members now. We've been growing steadily since the mid to late 1990s. It's not so well known here in the United States. It actually came to the United States from Mexico. So it tends to be, NAS tends to be a thing you find more in Hispanic parishes. But we do have a chapter. It's right here. I'm one of them. Anybody wants to try that out, you're welcome to come. So a lot of good things, I think, good things happening. I mean, there was a Eucharistic festival's not the right word, but an event held at Forbes Field in 1950. 20,000 people came out to adore the Blessed Sacrament. We don't get those kind of numbers today, but the trend line is good. And that's, so I kind of want to make that point, that Eucharistic adoration is really growing, notwithstanding the fact that there's, not really a lot of formal effort to make it happen. It's just the activity of the Holy Spirit. So it's something that's important to me. I know some of you are involved in perpetual adoration, and I wanted to give you this kind of quick summary of how we got to this practice. Thank you.